After rescuing the neutral species from occupation, humanity's government sent out a message to the Alliance forces. The message read, "Return the slaves you have taken from the neutral species. You have 500 standard hours," which, in human terms, is 621 hours, or 26 days. The message continued, "If you do not return them, we will take them from you." The Alliance species laughed at this, as they still had plenty of resources to face off against humanity. They fully ignored the message, not thinking anything of it. One species in particular, that the humans called furry, had already had their pride damaged in the council when the humans had arrived. They flaunted their new slaves in front of the humans when they sent videos showing off their humanoid slaves. The more human, the better, to run the point home. They would fondle the slaves in front of them all, saying all sorts of nasty things, or force them into not-so-pleasurable acts in front of the recording device. They would beat the slaves until they couldn't move, bloodied all over, or simply hold them up and kill them with their bare hands, as in their bare claw-like hands. The humans were silent about this for 26 days. This looked like a sign of fear from everyone on the outside. They expected the humans to do something, but the only movement was recovery vessels in the formal neutral sectors going back and forth. Those were the only ones that could be picked up. By the end of the countdown, the Alliance species sent another message, this one challenging the humans to try and kill us, it said. The message sent back was surprising. We already have. Within less than 1 standard hour of this message being sent, a whole bunch of stations went completely dark. Even with enhanced security and patrol groups, everything just disappeared off the sensors. And I mean all the sensors. Nothing was picked up except sometimes a small energy burst. Distress calls also began to come in, and suddenly dozens of planets went dark at the same time. Sometimes they would send out a quick distress call and then just nothing. If anything came through, all you could hear was, "The humans have come!" before something seemingly cutting off the transmission. A jammer, maybe the transmitter was damaged, nobody knew. The Alliance forces immediately scrambled forces to find out what happened. Entire battle groups were sent, only to either find absolutely nothing of the stations, but just all sorts of nearly atomized debris, or entire planets burning with the planetary defenses blown to absolute pieces as they tumbled through the atmosphere, causing even more fires. The Alliance couldn't figure out, as most of the damage was from meteor impacts. It didn't make sense because they had some sort of defenses, but this is what the planetary defense fleet was for, to stop this. How could they do this? The humans continued to strike all around the perimeter of Allied space, leaving the Alliance forces to scramble over and over into areas being hit, and areas they try to salvage and who they could. The veracity and efficiency of the attacks could absolutely not be ignored, as they seemed to be so systematic, so designed. Well, just how could they not take out the humans? They had no idea how they were doing that. Humanity's plan was working. They would use random strikes to cause all sorts of chaos to make sure that the enemy couldn't reconsolidate their forces fast enough. Hit-and-run attacks were being used due to them being extremely outnumbered. Yet they could rush in with overwhelming force, strike a target, and disappear. When they came in to, say, a station, they jammed it upon entering the area so they couldn't send a message out. Then, as they took care of the defense units, they sent a nuke that penetrated the station while the security fleet was being handled. Then, once it was inside, the nuke would explode, blowing the station apart in a ball of fire that swallowed it up. The debris field spread out amongst them all. Just as the humans were leaving, the debris field would then take out the rest of the defenses. Rinse and repeat. Humans being obsessed with stealth allowed them to simply disappear and reappear whenever they wanted to. Even though they couldn't jump absolutely perfect where they wanted to, they could get close enough, and that's all that really mattered. When it came down to planets, there was absolutely no time for biologicals or chemicals. Those are terror weapons, and pointless when killing everybody is the actual goal. The mixed fleet of human and friendly forces would arrive as 3 meteorites were being pushed their way straight towards the planet. The fleet that arrived from the human and friendly forces would keep the defenses busy while the rocks came in to strike. Because they were too busy, they couldn't interdict it, they couldn't deflect it, they couldn't even blow a piece off. As the rocks began to throw themselves through the atmosphere towards the planet, nukes were sent down, but these were not to land on the planet. They would burst inside the atmosphere, causing massive overlapping EMP shock waves. This would take out any and all of their electronics, with the power shut off to all the services, vehicles, and anything else that was there. There was no stopping it. There was no way of putting out the fires. The meteors strike down across the planet, causing tsunamis, quakes, volcanoes to erupt that sent ash clouds everywhere. Pyroclastic flows would go down, take down entire cities, and supervolcanoes would turn entire continents into unsurvivable wastelands of ash and death. Amongst that, the reactors they were using to power themselves no longer were able to cool down themselves because the ash clouds would fill up their coolant tanks, not allowing anything to move. Then they would overheat, and if they weren't built well enough, kablooey. Any planetary fleet in space survived just long enough to watch the world they were protecting burn before they too were destroyed. Very few could get away. This was exclusively escape vessels from the planet. It seemed as though the humans had no interest in them and just let them go. Within 7 days of these strikes starting, 28 stations, shipyards, and battle stations were completely and totally annihilated. 39 planets were either completely uninhabitable now or crippled by humanity and their friends. In desperation, the leaders of the Alliance demanded a full strike on Earth, even though their admirals protested this because it's just not done to strike a homeworld. It didn't matter. The orders came down and they would follow it. The order was to destroy the human homeworld, or at least make it uninhabitable. The human fleet must be scattered at this point, attacking all these different targets. That means that it should be a much easier target. And with the amount of ships they're sending, there's no way they could be stopped. It took another 6 days to make sure they had as many ships as they needed, and then they jumped right towards Sol. Jumping into Sol, they found humans waiting, surprisingly. With all the strange radiation and different gravitational fields, they had to actually come out of FTL at ×3 lunar orbit. The enemy immediately began to fire at Earth with their mass drivers. While they did this, drones, missiles, and torpedoes and other mass drivers protected the planet from most of what was coming towards it. The only human ships to leave the battle space were the carriers, not designed for slug matches, and they knew it, so they had to get clear. All others formed up with the defense satellites and began to fire back with everything they had. Alliance forces, surprised at the number and type of ships that remained. They were expecting some of the older vessels, but no. This was brand new battleships, cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and more corvettes than they could even count. All of them either forming up or moving into position. Alliance outnumbered the human forces 36-1, so they immediately pressed their advantage. Humans did something crazy at that point. They fired as many torpedoes as they could in one big volley, and then the drones right behind it. They then charged towards the cannons, moving forward, but not as fast as you would think. At current ranges, getting a hit from a mass driver cannon was mere chance, so they wanted to get some distance. They made it farther out than the satellites, but not by much. They needed them to watch their back, plus they didn't want to be caught out of position in case there was another fleet coming in. Alliance forces kept their ranks and advanced under the increasingly accurate fire as they got closer. The Alliance sent out their snub fighters and sent their own torpedoes to crush the human fleet and to stop those ordnance coming in. It appeared as though the torpedoes would just bypass each other on the way to their targets. What they were not expecting is that humans' torpedoes still use a single-barrel las cannon out the nose. This is used to strike at the enemy torpedoes as they go by, or at any fighters that try to come at them from the front. The admiral of the Alliant forces was absolutely shocked and asked how were those really human torpedoes or were those drones? He got his answer as one suddenly got through and rocked the ship with such force that it took him completely off his paws, out of his seat, and up against the bulkhead. He got back to his feet as the Alliance XO, angrily cursing, stood back up. He tried to answer the question with, "I don't know, sir. They look almost like those freaking sharks, but with freaking laser beams on their freaking heads." Coming back to himself, he realized an order he hadn't given. The commander started to yell out, "Charge all freaking point defenses and take out those, sharks? Shoot the damn things!" The Alliance fighters had issues taking torpedoes that shot back. Human drones have no such issue. Unfortunately, dealing with the Alliance torpedoes drained them of more than 50% of their ordnance. Most of them were jam-packed with short-range missiles designed mainly for other drones, fighters, corvettes, something of that size. To something the size of a battleship, it might poke a hole, if you're lucky. Or if you get a good hit, it might cause a secondary explosion. But like they say, one bee sting's gonna hurt, 1,000,000 will kill you. The slug match in space between humanity and the Alliance continues as the torpedoes begin to take point defense fire. The drones are right behind them as they hit the Alliance lines. The drones lock onto any target they can and launch all their ordnance at one time. This is thousands of drones, each carrying at least 10 to 100 different missiles. This will cause any point defense system to get confused, allowing for even more ordnance to get through. The point defense system won't even know where to look. It's just going to fire wildly at that point. The Alliance formation begins to show weakening as the torpedoes cause many of the ships to explode and make others disabled, and they just end up drifting through space. The Alliance fleet seems very well organized as they immediately reform, taking up positions where those ships had either exploded or, now that they were out of position, closing up the gaps. As they do so, they simply fly past the hulks of the fallen, seemingly not caring at all about those that may still be on board. They still outnumber the humans at this point, still 30-1, as they get within range of the las cannons. As the las cannons charge up, another volley of human mass drivers hits the formation, and yet the Alliance still advances. In an act of brazen hubris, the Alliance orders all the ships to fire their mass drivers at the same time, as any they have ready. Fire off in one big volley, just not firing off as they wish. Knowing this, the humans must waste ordnance to protect their planets, which means they're going to run out of projectiles. Another strike hits the formation of Alliance coming from the mass drivers, and this time it's far more accurate as they realize they're getting much closer to each other. They need to end this battle quickly before they take wholly unsustainable losses, since they no longer have shipyards. They can't replace the ships they have, so they need to make this count. The human ships fire all their point defenses they have at the mass driver rounds coming in. The volley is only minimally effective, unfortunately, as projectiles fly past the defensive lines. Though most will land harmlessly in the water, many of the Pacific Islands will no longer exist by the end of the battle. As las cannons from both sides begin their dance of death across the battlefield, everyone, no matter the side, reach a pucker factor of over 9,000. At its current range, the cannons will scorch the ship, causing minimal hull breaches if you get a good enough shot. As both sides get closer to each other, eventually the cannons will be able to cut through a battleship, cutting it clean in two with a single swing of the cannon. With this in mind, the humans charged the cannons. Every gunship and corvette charged out of formation directly at the enemy, using their speed and maneuverability to distance themselves and distract the cannons as they fired. It worked, as some of the ships on the inside tried desperately to swing their cannons far enough to strike the corvettes and gunships. Well, let's just say fratricide from the Alliance vessels trying to hit the human fast attack craft would cut their own ships, especially at point-blank ranges. The human battleships maneuver themselves to bring as many cannons to bear as possible, along with their drivers, and now their systems are all running hot. On both sides, ships actually show this as they begin to glow from the heat, as their respective cooling systems are pushed well beyond their limits. The human battleship Krakatoa was destroyed as 4 las cannons cut her to pieces. The battleship Everest took a glancing hit that caused several turrets to actually explode, forcing the ship to shake violently, tossing everybody around inside. As the battleship Fuji took a hit that destroyed one of her mass drivers, causing her to visibly shudder as it exploded from the built-up energy, things began to look really, really bad. Smelling blood in the water, Alliance ships began to throw mass driver rounds randomly at the planet. Though the Earth defenses are throwing everything they have, the rotation of the planet means that the Philippines, Japan, Russia, Taiwan, China, and even parts of India are going to be peppered by mass driver strikes. Though they're not nearly as destructive as a nuke, they can still destabilize several city blocks in every direction with a hit, not to mention the shockwave as it comes through the atmosphere. A message then comes through across to all ships. There's a strange sound. Is that a musical instrument? The Alliance thought. Some of them thought of what they had learned from the humans. There was something they heard about a piece of brass that the humans used to signal their ground forces a long time ago. It was to be heard across the battlefield to let everybody know what was coming, but the Alliance didn't know what it meant. Aboard the human ships, they all cheered at the sound as they knew the cavalry had arrived. Jumping in from multiple directions, the Mars fleet, the Venus fleet, the Colonies fleets all arrived, but they brought friends. The hounds, the chitters, the dragons, halflings, slithers, squids, birdies, all of them. Even a formerly neutral species that looked like an anthropomorphized house cat, the humans called Garfields, jumped in between the Earth Defense Fleet and the Alliance, only 700 kilometers away from the bow of the Fuji. The ships that jumped out and immediately turned to face the Alliance head-on and began firing. The captain of the destroyer, Laffy, screamed out, "I thought I taught Putty Tat!" His Exo immediately turns and goes, you did taught Putty Tat, and they're here to kick some ass." The Alliance now only had 2-to-1 odds. On top of that, they had been completely and totally flanked. In desperation, their formation broke. In the chaos, they tried to run, but as they did, the formation became absolutely distorted as some of the ships began to slam into each other many times, breaking them apart and then exploding. They also found out as they desperately tried to shoot the enemies in all directions that friendly fire isn't so friendly. enemy spread out in all direction as the Alliance ships tried to get some sort of distance. They didn't want to be as clustered as they were. This turned space into an absolute melee, an old school furball, and this is where humans just love to fight. The las cannons seemed to dance all across space in every single direction, cutting ships apart, ordnance that was coming in, torpedoes and missiles. Mass driver cannons began to crash into ships, tearing them to pieces, many of them hitting the engines, and you would watch a cascading explosion go from the ass all the way to the face and just blowing right out the nose. Torpedoes of every shape and size were launched into the battle space as they went around and hunted more and more and more. This caused the sensors on both sides to absolutely have a convulsion. Most of the operators couldn't figure out anything. They could barely get an IFF code, and they tried just not to shoot their own guys. It was impossible to focus on anything for more than a moment. Many of them had to limit themselves to visual scanning, which gave the few fighters remaining just the edge that no one else had, as they did have a cockpit. The drones themselves didn't even know what to fire at and were easy targets. However, most fighters were just trying to get back to their ships so they could get the hell out of there. In all the confusion, many of the Alliance ships were able to turn to try and get away, yet humanity said, "Oh no, you're not going anywhere," and began to charge straight at them, firing everything until the barrels quite literally melted down on some of their ships, and they continued to fire until the last of the Alliance ships either left or were nothing more than burning, glowing hulks in space. Humanity and their friends had to stop and lick their wounds. As they did, they sent a message to the Alliance right after the battle. There was a little bit lost in translation, of course, there always is. Yet the Alliance understood the message as it came across clear, saying, "It was understood that homeworlds were to be left untouched. It was what we humans call a gentleman's agreement, yet you insisted on coming after our home planet. You have truly mated vertically. Now it's time to find out what we have been trying to contain." With this, another 20 station went dark along with 10 colonies as they read this, along with 2 full planets. The message continued, "You have released the monster, and it's hungry for blood. You let the monster out, and it's coming for you." Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me on today's chapter. Before I go, I gotta send out a thank you to one of my supporters, and that would be Erica Gem. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.